She called it a family meeting. I called it an ambush. I remember standing in my kitchen that Sunday morning, pouring my second cup of coffee, watching the birds at the feeder my late husband planted by the window 18 years ago. The light was coming in, at that particular angle it only does in October, gold and low and honest. I was thinking about maybe raking the backyard leaves that afternoon, maybe not. That's what 63 looks like for me. A full calendar of maybes and the freedom to choose any of them. My daughter texted at 9:14. "Can you come over for brunch? Just the family. Miss you." I should have known. She only says she misses me when she wants something. Her name is Kristen. She's 41, which means she's been my daughter long enough to know better and young enough to still think she knows more than me. She married a man named Spencer 8 years ago. Spencer sells commercial insurance and has the handshake of a man who practiced it in the mirror. He calls me Judy's mom at family gatherings, which is not my name and never has been. My name is Ruth. Ruth Ellen Calloway, née Whitmore, and I have never in my life gone by Judy. I drove over with a container of the lemon bars I'd made Friday because I was raised right. When I walked in, Kristen's brother was already there, my son. His name is Patrick, and he's 38, and he was sitting at his sister's kitchen island with his arms crossed and his eyes not quite meeting mine. That's how I knew before anyone said a word. Patrick cannot lie to my face. He never could. When he was 9 and broke the garage window with a baseball, he sat at dinner with that exact expression, chin down, arms folded, looking at the table. Spencer was at the coffee maker. He offered to pour me a cup. I said I'd already had 2, thank you. Kristen had set the table nicely. That was another sign. She's not a formal person. Paper napkins, plastic cups, that's her usual. That morning she had the cloth placemats out, the ones I gave her when she moved in. There was a fruit bowl. There were mimosas. I sat down and waited. She opened a folder. I want to stop right here because I need you to understand what was in that folder. It wasn't brunch conversation material. It wasn't a recipe or a vacation itinerary or a printout about something she'd read online. It was a color brochure, thick and glossy, with a photograph on the front of a white-haired woman walking in a garden with a female attendant, both of them smiling in a way that suggested the photographer had asked them to smile. Across the top it read, Meadowbrook Senior Living, Independent and Assisted Care Options. Kristen slid it across the table toward me. "We've done a lot of research, Mom," she said. "We think this could be really wonderful for you." I looked at the brochure. Then I looked at her. Then I looked at Patrick, who was still studying the granite countertop like it owed him money. I picked up the brochure. I opened it. I read the first page, which described something called the Sunrise Package for $5,400 a month, inclusive of 3 meals daily, weekly housekeeping, and access to on-site activities, including watercolor classes and chair yoga. I closed the brochure. I set it back on the table. I said, "This is the nicest way anyone has ever told me to get out of my house." Kristen said, "Mom, it's not like that." Spencer said, "Ruth, we're just thinking about your future." Patrick didn't say anything. I asked them to tell me what, specifically, they were worried about. I kept my voice very calm. I've had 63 years to practice calm. I was calm when the hospital called about my husband. I was calm when the tree fell through the roof in 2019. Calm is not the same as fine. Calm is what you choose when you're deciding what to do next. Kristen said she was worried about me being alone, said the house was getting to be too much for one person, said she'd noticed things. I asked her what things. She mentioned a bill she'd seen on the counter last spring when she stopped by. A water bill that had gone past due by 12 days. I had been in Florida visiting my college roommate. I had set up autopay, but switched banks and it slipped through. Once. 12 years after my husband died, and I'd been managing this house alone, one bill slipped through by 12 days. She mentioned that I hadn't come to Thanksgiving last year. I hadn't come because her father-in-law had been there, and he and I had an unpleasant exchange the prior year about politics that Kristen had chosen to forget about, and I had chosen not to repeat. That was it. That was the evidence. I looked at Spencer. I said, "Is this about my house?" He did the mirror handshake thing with the air. Just a little motion of his hands, a kind of settling gesture. "Ruth, Your house is a real asset. In this market. Spencer, I said, is this about my house? Kristen jumped in, said they weren't trying to take anything, said they were just asking me to think about options, said Meadowbrook had a waiting list, so if I was interested, sooner was better than later. Patrick finally spoke. He said, "Mom, I just think it's worth a conversation." I looked at my son. He looked at his coffee cup. I picked up my lemon bars and my purse. I said, "I'll think about it," and I meant it, just not the way they thought. I drove home slowly, not because I was shaken. I wasn't, not the way they might have hoped. I was thinking, there's a difference. My house is a 4-bedroom colonial on Elm Creek Road that my husband and I bought in 1989 for $147,000. I know what it's worth now. I've gotten 3 unsolicited letters from real estate agents in the past 6 months alone, each one breathless about the market, each one enclosing a business card. I'm not naive. I watch the news. I know what houses like mine are going for in this county. I also know that Kristen and Spencer have been having money trouble. I know because Kristen told me last Christmas, without meaning, to tell me by mentioning that they'd restructured some things with the house, which in married people language means they pulled equity. And I know because I'd heard from her friend Amber, who talks too much, that Spencer's commercial insurance business had lost a major client earlier this year. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I spent 31 years as a middle school librarian. I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I teach kids to read. I believe in stories and in second chances and in the general decency of it. But I also know what it means when your daughter sets out the good placemats. When I got home, I went to my filing cabinet, the one in the spare bedroom that no one else has ever touched. I pulled out my mortgage documents, my property deed, my will, and a file I keep labeled House that has every piece of paper I've ever signed related to this property. I sat at the kitchen table with my reading glasses on and I read through all of it. My house is mine. Free and clear. Paid off in 2018. My name, and only my name, on the deed since my husband passed. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Dale Whitfield. He's 71 and semi-retired and has been my family's attorney since before I was married. He listened to me at Sunday's brunch, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Ruth, I think you did the right thing coming to me." He told me a few things I hadn't known. He told me about something called elder financial exploitation, which is the fastest growing form of financial fraud in the United States. He told me that family members account for the majority of perpetrators. He told me there's a legal mechanism, guardianship, or in some cases conservatorship, where a family member can petition a court to have an older adult declared incompetent to manage their own affairs. And he told me very gently that this doesn't require the person to actually be incompetent. It just requires enough of a paper trail to suggest concern. A past due water bill, missed Thanksgiving. I sat in his office and I let that land. Then I asked him what I could do. He said, "First, document everything. Second, get a full cognitive evaluation from my doctor, proactively on my own terms so any future claims about my mental fitness would have a clean medical record behind them. Third, look carefully at any financial accounts that had been jointly established or that anyone else had access to." I had one joint account from years ago. Kristen was a co-signer, a holdover from when her father was sick, and we'd added her in case something happened to me quickly. I'd forgotten it was still joint. She hadn't. I don't know when she first accessed it. I know that when I looked carefully at the statements, which I hadn't looked at carefully in over a year because it was a small account I almost never used, under $4,000, there were withdrawals I didn't make, not large ones. 50 here, 80 there. Spread over 8 months. Small enough not to notice. Deliberate. I sat in my car in Dale Whitfield's parking lot for a long time after that second appointment, not crying. I want to be very clear that I was not crying. I was doing the same thing I'd done since I was a little girl sitting in the principal's office after some classroom injustice. I was getting very, very still. My mother used to say that still water runs deep. She was talking about me. Over the following 6 weeks, I made a list. I closed the joint account. I called the bank and explained that I'd like to remove the secondary account holder, which they confirmed I was entitled to do as the primary, and I transferred the remaining balance to a new account Kristen knew nothing about. I did this on a Tuesday morning without telling anyone. I got my evaluation with Dr. Nessa, my physician of 15 years. She ran me through the full battery: memory, reasoning, executive function. I scored in the 92nd percentile for my age group on verbal recall. Dr. Nessa said, dryly, "Ruth, you're sharper than half my staff." She wrote up a formal assessment. I had Dale file it with my medical records and make 3 copies. I also called Patrick. He came over on a Thursday evening. I made pot roast because it's his favorite, and also because I wanted him to be comfortable enough to be honest with me. We ate, and I asked him, plainly, whether he was in agreement with what Kristen and Spencer were planning. He said he wasn't in agreement. Exactly. He said he was worried about me, and when Kristen had brought it to him, he hadn't wanted to make waves. I asked him if he knew Spencer had been accessing funds. He set his fork down. I showed him the bank statements. I walked him through the 8 months of quiet withdrawals. I showed him the dates, the amounts, the pattern. I watched his face go from uncomfortable to pale. He said, "Mom, I didn't know." I believed him. I still believe him. Patrick is many things, but he has never been a liar, and the look on his face that evening was not the look of a man caught. It was the look of a man who had been used. I told him I wasn't asking him to take sides. I told him I was asking him to stay out of the way while I handled it. He said, "What are you going to do?" I told him I wasn't sure yet, which was only half true. I had a pretty clear idea what I was still waiting for was a conversation with Kristen that she didn't know I'd been preparing for. She called in November. Said she'd been thinking about Meadowbrook. Said they had a unit coming available in January. Said the timing was good. Her voice had that particular brightness it gets when she's decided something and is presenting it as though it's still a question. I told her I'd like to see the place before making any decisions. She said she'd already scheduled a tour. Of course she had. We went on a Wednesday. Kristen drove. Spencer couldn't make it. "Work thing," she said, and Patrick wasn't invited. I brought my reading glasses and a small notebook, which Kristen found slightly amusing. I wrote everything down: the monthly fee structure, the lease terms, the contract language around what happens if a resident wants to leave, the policy for personal property brought into the unit. I also noted, quietly, that the lease would have required me to surrender my home address within 60 days of move-in, and that the agreement included a clause about assigning a financial representative to assist residents with billing. Kristen was beaming the whole tour. She loved the garden, the light in the dining room, the fact that there was a book club. She kept saying, "Doesn't this feel nice, Mom? And I really think you'd be happy here." I said it was lovely. On the drive home, she mentioned casually that she and Spencer had spoken with a real estate attorney. "Just to understand the process," she said. "If I decided to sell the house, what the timeline might look like." I said, She said Spencer had actually looked into the value, and he thought we could get somewhere north of $800,000 in the current market. I said, "He's probably right." She said, "The Meadowbrook contract requires proof of funding within 90 days. If you sell the house, the timing actually works out really well." I looked at the road ahead of us. I said, "You know, Kristen, I've been thinking a lot about property lately, too." She glanced over. I said, "How are things with your house?" There was a pause. "Fine," I said, "and the equity line you took out in August." Another pause. Longer. "Who told you about that?" "It's a matter of public record," I said. "When you pull equity, it shows on the deed." I had Dale look a few things up. She said it was just for some renovations. Her voice had changed. The brightness was gone. I said, "Kristen, I know about the account." I said it very quietly. We were at a red light. She had both hands on the wheel, and she was staring straight ahead, and I watched the color come up in the back of her neck. I said, "I know about the withdrawals. I have the statements. I've had them for 6 weeks." She said my name. She said it the way she used to when she was 12 and was about to cry before she knew whether she was in trouble or not. I said, "I'm not going to discuss this in a car. Come to Sunday dinner." I spent the rest of that week making phone calls. The first one was to a real estate agent I've known for years, a woman named Grace Ellison, who sold a house 2 doors down from me in 2021, and who I liked because she was efficient and honest and brought me a pie when the deal closed, for no reason except that she was raised right. I asked her to come take a look at a property I was considering listing. The property was not my house. Kristen and Spencer's house had been purchased in their joint names. I know this because Spencer told me proudly at their housewarming dinner, explaining the advantages of joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Spencer is the kind of man who explains things. I've always found it interesting. What Spencer had also done, as I'd confirmed with Dale, was use a home equity line of credit to pull $112,000 out of that property in August of this year. The reasons weren't entirely clear, though Dale had a theory involving the business losses. What was clear was that the loan existed, was documented, and that Kristen had signed the paperwork too. Also clear, they were underwater. The equity they had pulled, combined with the original mortgage, put them in a position where selling the house would leave them barely even, which explained a great deal about why my house, with its clear title and no mortgage and $800,000 market value, had become so interesting to them. I wasn't listing their house. I want to be clear about that. I had no legal authority to list their house. What I did was ask Grace to come assess its value, and I asked her to leave me a written comparative market analysis, and I sat with that document at my kitchen table and I made my plan. Sunday came. I made a real dinner. Roast chicken, green beans, the good rolls. Patrick was there. Kristen and Spencer arrived together, Spencer in the sport coat he wears when he wants to look serious. Kristen's face was tight. She'd spent the week trying to figure out what I knew, I imagine, and how much and what I was going to do with it. We ate dinner. We talked about nothing: Patrick's job, the weather, a news story about a school down in the county. Spencer had 2 glasses of wine. Kristen had one and stopped. When I cleared the plates and came back with coffee, I set 3 things on the table. The first was the bank statement, 8 months, with the withdrawals highlighted in yellow. The second was a letter from Dr. Nessa's office, on official letterhead, summarizing my cognitive evaluation results. The third was the comparative market analysis Grace Ellison had prepared for me, for Kristen and Spencer's house. I sat down. I folded my hands. Spencer stared at the table. He was very still in the way that people are still when they're calculating. Kristen looked at me and said, "Mom, I can explain." I said, "I know you can. I'd like you to listen first." I told them what I knew. I told them about the account, the withdrawals, the total of $4,820 over 8 months. I told them I'd had a conversation with Dale Whitfield, who had advised me on my options. I told them about the cognitive evaluation, and I slid Dr. Nessa's letter across the table. I said that if anyone ever attempted to petition for guardianship or conservatorship on my behalf, this document would be part of my response, along with the bank statements showing why such a petition had been contemplated. Spencer opened his mouth. I said, "Spencer, I have not finished." He closed it. I told them I was not calling the police. I was making that decision once, and I was not going to revisit it, and it was contingent on the money being repaid in full within 60 days to a new account I would provide the number for, and on the understanding that my home, my finances, and my decisions about where I live were not a family matter open for discussion. I pushed the CMA across the table to Kristen. She looked at it. She looked at me. I said, "Your house is worth $490, give or take, with what you owe on the equity line and the mortgage. That leaves you with about $60,000 in equity if you sold today. That's not nothing. That's a down payment somewhere smaller. I'm not telling you to sell. I'm telling you I know your situation, and I know why you came to me, and I need you to know that I know." Kristen was crying. Quiet tears, not performed ones. Her mascara was going down her face and she wasn't wiping it. She said, "I was scared, Mom. We were so scared." Spencer's contract fell through and the equity line was supposed to be a bridge, and then things just... She stopped, pressed her fingers to her mouth. Spencer was looking at the tablecloth. I said, "I understand being scared." I said it and I meant it. I have been scared. I have been scared in ways my children probably don't know about. When their father's diagnosis came in, when the money was tight in the early years, when I had to figure out for the first time in my life at 58 years old what it meant to be completely alone in a house. Scared is not permission to do what they did. But I'm her mother. That doesn't go away. I said, I am not your solution. My house is not your solution. But I am willing to sit down with both of you and Dale together and look honestly at your options. There may be things you haven't considered. There may be ways to get from where you are to somewhere better that don't involve decisions you'll regret. Spencer said very quietly. We didn't mean for it to go this far, I said, I know. Patrick, who had sat through all of this in silence, pushed back his chair and carried the coffee cups to the sink. He stood there with his back to us for a moment. Then he turned around and he said, Spencer, you owe my mother an apology. A real one. Not to the tablecloth. Spencer looked up. He looked at me. He said, Ruth, I'm sorry. I am genuinely sorry. I am not a woman who tells people their apologies are fine when they're not. I said, we'll see. I meant it the same way I'd meant it the first time I said it, as a beginning, not an end. The 60 days came and went. The money came back in 2 installments, the first within 3 weeks, the second at day 51. I confirmed both with Dale. I had him draft a brief letter, signed by Kristen and Spencer, acknowledging the account access and the repayment with language that Dale's office would retain on file. Not a legal weapon, an insurance policy. In January, I put new locks on the house, not because I was afraid of my daughter, but because it was time. I had the security system updated too, and I filed a deed protection notice with the county recorder's office, a relatively new instrument that flags any attempt to file a deed transfer against a property without the owner's notarized signature. Dale explained it. Grace Ellison's office had mentioned it, a small thing, an important thing. Spencer's business recovered partially by spring. They didn't sell the house. Patrick came over for dinner most Sundays through the winter, which I found I appreciated more than I expected to. He brought a bottle of wine every time and never said much, but he sat at my kitchen table the way he used to as a teenager. Comfortable and a little quiet, and it reminded me of who he is underneath all the things life has made him. Kristen and I had a harder road. We had coffee in February at a neutral place, and we talked carefully around the edges of everything for about an hour. In March, she called me on a Tuesday for no reason, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing. Her garden, a show she'd been watching, whether I'd tried the new bakery on Clover Street. At the end of the call, she said, I love you, Mom. I said it back. I meant it. It's possible to love someone and to also be watching them, carefully. Meadowbrook is still there, I assume. Still has its brochure with the smiling garden lady. I drove past it once in March on my way to somewhere else. Good gardens, honestly. Maybe someday I'll need something like it. Maybe I won't. That morning in October feels a long time ago now. The birds are back at the feeder. The leaves came down and I raked them myself. 2 afternoons, good weather, radio on. The light in my kitchen is gold again. My name is Ruth Ellen Calloway. This is my house. I paid for it, I've kept it, and I know exactly what it's worth, in dollars and in everything else. I am 63 years old, and nobody is moving me anywhere I didn't decide to go.